Whilst we have seen movement around Russia's military bases in Syria, I think it's still too soon to tell whether Russia will be removed completely from the Syrian equation. I suspect Putin will be already trying to negotiate ways to create a path forward where they can hold on to these bases, bearing in mind that the naval base in Tartus has been a reality that dates back to the Cold War. So this is a long-term strategic interest for Russia. It provides access to the Mediterranean. It provides maneuverability across into North Africa, and it allows for Russian activity in Libya. And this is a key asset that Russia will take great pains not to lose. And so we need to be observing closely what the next steps are with respect to Russia's maneuvering inside Syria with HTS and the interim government. I am Dr. Burcu Ozcelik. I'm a senior research fellow in Middle East and North African security at RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute based in London. So in a series of very surprising, dizzying events over the course of about 11 days, the HTS, which is an Islamist armed organization that has been governing the province of Idlib in northwestern Syria, they launched a lightning speed offensive that eventually saw the capture of Damascus, the capital of Syria, and the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad, who has been ruling Syria with an iron fist for decades, along with his father for over 50 years in total. So this came as a surprise to many, following almost 15 years of a brutal civil war that has tormented the Syrian people since 2011. We finally are at a moment that many of us did not think was possible. And the unthinkable has been achieved in the sense that Bashar al-Assad's regime has been toppled. He and his family are reported to have fled to Russia. And now what we're seeing is the emergence of an interim government led by the HTS, which is the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. And they have already made very positive, encouraging early indications that they will govern through the principles of inclusivity, of political representation, of respect for the rights and dignity of minorities, and bearing in mind that Syria is home to a diverse and heterogeneous population that includes Christians, Alawites, the Druze, and a sizable Kurdish population as well. So early encouraging signs, but many questions remain as Syria now is sort of perched precariously between a moment of great opportunity to set a new chart, to chart a new path forward, as well as a high level of vulnerability because of the uncertainty around whether HTS will be able to govern effectively, fairly, and in an accountable manner to the Syrian population. If HTS governs Damascus and Greater Syria in the same way that it has governed Idlib over the past few years, it would be fair to say that we could anticipate some issues. HTS has been recorded and reported to have governed through means of violence, of coercion against local dissidents. It has at times implemented quite draconian rules against women in public places in Idlib. It has been allegedly responsible for the unlawful detention and acts of violence against those who it deems to not be living in accordance with Sharia law, bearing in mind that this is an Islamist organization that ultimately, yes, wanted to topple Assad and has been successful, but also envisions a future Syria that is governed by Islamic law, Islamic jurisprudence. And that would have implications for family law, inheritance, taxation, for the entirety, the full spectrum of social and political life in the future of Syria. And so because of this patchy track record of a lack of accountability to the population over which it rules and Idlib governorate, the acts of violence for which it has been responsible, and this mixed track record really overall, these are some of the reasons why there are questions around its ability to govern effectively and fairly in Syria going forward through the period of this interim transitional government, which is set to run up until early March, as well as subsequent to that, because it, I think, is fair to assume that the leader of HTS, as well as the administrative task force that is now emerging, will have aspirations to rule Syria for the foreseeable future. So the question is, will they commit to an electoral timeline to hold fair and free elections in Syria, which will be a hugely challenging task given, again, that the country has not only been at war, it's civil war, since 2011, with a high level of external military interference by neighboring states and others. But also, Syria has limited experience with democratic institutions, with procedural democracy. And so this is, again, a moment of great fragility as well as opportunity. So it remains to be seen the extent to which HTS and the other allied rebel factions that are working with HTS, to the extent to which they will be able to govern effectively for the long term, and the kind of plan that they have in mind for the governance structure of Syria is yet to be determined. The roadmap yet is not very clear. The early indications, however, are positive. Despite its patchy track record in the area of human rights, and arbitrary detentions of local dissidents, its treatment of women and minorities in Idlib, over recent years, al-Jolani, the leader of HTS, has demonstrated a quite convincing pivot in his rhetoric, in the kinds of discourse language that he has used on behalf of the organization in favor of rules of the rule of law, democracy, pluralism, and inclusion. So the question is, can HTS now translate that rhetoric, those promises, into actual governing and policy making in Damascus and in Syria writ large? There are conflicting reports as to how deep into Syrian territory Israeli forces have moved. Since very early on, after the overthrow of the regime of Bashar al-Assad, the Israeli Defense Forces took military action that they describe as being preemptive and defensive, to protect Israeli national security interests. And so initially we saw aerial attacks against what were described as chemical weapons plants, storage depots across the border. Israeli forces then moved into and seized crucial strategic territory in the Golan Heights. And this is highly significant from the Israeli perspective. In the long term, Syria has been a hostile neighbor to Israel for a considerable amount of time. There is no peace agreement conducting the relations between these two states. Iran has been a very close ally of Syria for decades, and this has had consequences for Israel's national security and the security of their shared border. Given this very long history of hostility across the Syrian border, Israel now believes itself to be in the right in redefining the terms of engagement with the new Syria that is on the horizon. What that looks like is very unclear where we are today. Will Syria be overrun by a patchwork of armed militia? Or will HTS transition into a democratic and inclusive political party? These are open-ended questions, and Israel is seizing this moment of opportunity to ensure that whatever happens inside Syria, Israel is protected and protects its border and asserts control over the Golan Heights, which Israel has claimed a sovereign right over for some time, and that is, of course, legally disputed. The United States, under President Trump, of course, recognized Israel's claims over the Golan Heights. But from the perspective of since the overthrow of Assad, what we're seeing is Iran has lost out on a key ally in the region. But it's not only a reputational or symbolic loss. Iran has also lost access to effectively a logistical route that would allow it to rearm Hezbollah in southern Lebanon and therefore pose a continuing risk to Israel's national security. And what Israel has done preemptively and defensively has been to ensure that Iran's link to Syria is completely broken down, that Iran will not have the ability in the short to medium term to be able to reconstitute effectively the supply chain that ran across Syria and allowed it to fund, to train, to arm groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. There's no doubt that the overthrow of the Assad regime has been a strategic defeat for Russia. Russia has invested significant funds as well as efforts into propping up the Assad regime since around 2015. And this has been ongoing. Russia saw Syria as a conduit for it to expand and consolidate, really, its power grip over the Middle East and beyond across the Mediterranean into North Africa. The naval base in Tartus is significant for Russia for many reasons, and it will take I suspect Russia will not want to see that go anytime soon. And whilst Russia's presence in Syria has now been cast into question, I think that in the longer term, and Russia and Iran both play the long game in this dance, this geopolitical dance in the region that we're seeing play out again at great pace, at a dizzying speed. Both Russia and Iran will seek ways to engage with and negotiate with the new leaders of Syria. And statements from the Kremlin have already indicated that they are in communication, in close contact with opposition factions in Syria, including and mainly the HTS. So the lines of communication are there. This is a moment now, again, we're very early days into the new Syria, the post-Assad reality. And what we're seeing are regional states, including Russia, Iran, certainly Turkey and Israel, both take diplomatic measures to test the waters, to see what they can hold on to in terms of their military strategic assets in Syria and how they can expand upon their existing strategic interests and consolidate their grip over Syria. So it's a moment of, there's a great scramble amongst regional powers to consolidate what they can in what remains of their interest in Syria and how they can position themselves going forward to ensure that their legacy is not lost, that their strategic interests and the investment that they have poured into Syria, it does not disappear overnight. So whilst we have seen movement around Russia's military bases in Syria, I think it's still too soon to tell whether Russia will be removed completely from the Syrian equation. I suspect Putin will be already trying to negotiate ways to create a path forward where they can hold on to these bases, bearing in mind that the naval base in Tartus has been a reality that dates back to the Cold War. So this is a long-term strategic interest for Russia. It provides access to the Mediterranean. It provides maneuverability across into North Africa, and it allows for Russian activity in Libya. And this is a key asset that Russia will take great pains not to lose. And so we need to be observing closely what the next steps are with respect to Russia's maneuvering inside Syria with HTS and the interim government up until March and following that as well. I don't think Russia sees this as necessarily game over from where it sits. That said, it is a strategic defeat and one that it will take Russia some time to come back from.